and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Penna Dexter. We have a lot to talk about today on Point of View. In the next hour, a Wall Street Journal piece that caught my attention a couple of weeks ago. I just lost my earring. A woman doesn't need an office to be empowered. That sounds kind of interesting, but our guest is going to be Erica Komisar, and she is a psychoanalyst. And I love the things she writes about that the Journal publishes, because she talks about the importance of mothers staying home with their little kids. What a concept. It is important to a lot of mothers. And she says even mothers who are well-educated, career-minded, just remember how important that job is. She recommends in her book staying home at least full-time, at least until the child is 3. They really need it, and there are great benefits to that. And she's in the Wall Street Journal piece, there's a little blurb that says, "A patient told me I feel pressured to leave my children and return to meaningful work." She tries to make the case that the work of raising children is actually very meaningful and very empowering. And we will talk with her in the second hour. But first, in this hour, we're going to speak with Tom Lindsay from the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And he's talking about a crisis in civil literacy and actually what the state of Texas is doing about it. There's been a bill passed to address this. And, you know, if you go and ask young people or people, just citizens, about certain things about the government or the First Amendment, how important it is, you get disturbing answers. And so the idea is kind of to take high school kids back and make sure they learn everything that that new citizens have to learn to become citizens of the United States, at least learn that much. And so we're going to talk about that. We'll also talk about comfort colleges and, you know, what's the purpose of college now? Is it to make you feel comfortable in your safe space, and what all of that suggests for us and for our culture? But, you know, I want to go back to something. I think Kirby may have addressed this a bit, but I want to continue to address it because it was shocking to me to hear this news. I followed the Amber Geiger case, and if someone else might not have, this was a Dallas police officer, and she accidentally one night, off duty, but in uniform, went into an apartment that was on a different floor from her. She thought it was hers, and the person that lived there was there. He was a black man. She felt threatened, shot him, killed him, and there's been a big trial, and she was found guilty of murder. And what happened in the aftermath of it was just so amazing and grace-filled, because she was sentenced to, I believe it's 10 years. Is it 10 years? Okay, 10 years, which, you know, people are disagreeing on whether that was too heavy of a sentence, too light of a sentence. But she was sentenced, and then at the sentencing, the brother of the victim, and the victim apparently was a believer. He was a Christian. He'd given his life to Christ, and his brother was 18 years old. The victim was in his 20s, and he asked if he could give Amber Geiger a hug, and the judge allowed it. And then he just basically said he forgave her. "I forgive you, and I know if you go to God and ask him, he will forgive you. I don't even want you to go to jail. I want the best for you, because I know that's exactly what Botham would want." He was the victim. And the best is to give your life to Christ. He's encouraging the person who's killed his brother to give her life to Christ. I think giving your life to Christ would be the best thing, and what Botham would want for you to do. Apparently, their father also is a believer and also was hoping that she would give her life to Christ. I'm not sure he agreed with the sentence so much, but after this scene happened, The judge that was involved, the presiding judge, Judge Kemp, actually came down from her bench. She handed Amber Geiger a Bible. She had gone into her chambers to get it. And she said, "You can have mine. I have 3 or 4 more at home." And then she said to Amber Geiger, "You just need a tiny mustard seed of faith." And she referred to John 3:16. She told her, "You start with this." And then she hugged. Actually, Amber Geiger hugged her. And then the judge said, "It's not because I'm good. It's because I believe in Christ. You haven't done so much that you can't be forgiven. You did something bad in one moment in time. What you do now matters." What a wonderful statement of faith. What a wonderful way of reaching out to try to bring someone who's guilty, as are we all, to Christ. I'm glad this story is getting national play because I think it shows so much grace. Now, of course, the judge is now getting trouble from our friends at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, that she should not be doing this. And if there are any appeals, I'm sure that she will be receiving criticism from those types of people. But I'm certainly glad she did it. It was a wonderful, wonderful gesture and a statement made for the Lord Jesus Christ. Also, I do want to mention that the Supreme Court actually approved a law, or is taking a case that is going to be very interesting, because a Texas law that required physicians to have admitting privileges at hospitals. Abortionists. Any abortion doctor, anyone performing abortion, would be required under the law to have admitting privileges at a local hospital. And the Texas law to that effect was struck down. But the Supreme Court has agreed to take Louisiana's law that really is pretty much the same. They say there are differences because of the number of miles that had to be driven and things like that. But that law is almost identical to the Texas law that was struck down. Now the Supreme Court will take this law, and of course the court is composed very differently. Now retired Justice Anthony Kennedy had joined the court's 4 liberals to form a majority in that it was really an abortion rights endorsement. But now things are going to be different. The court will hear this case, the Louisiana abortion law, and we've got Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and the others. So it's very possible that these restrictions on abortion would be upheld. And actually, it's protective of women. And it's also perhaps setting the tone for some other restrictions on abortion, and perhaps maybe even the court taking a case that would go to the core of this issue, which is Roe versus Wade. So we'll be watching that. The Texas case where it was called Whole Woman's Health versus Hellerstedt. It was a 2016 decision. We talked about it. That one didn't go the right way, this admitting privileges requirement. But the Louisiana law just may go a different way. So we're hoping so. Well, next up, we are going to talk with Tom Lindsay from Texas Public Policy Foundation. I think we do need a civics lesson in this country. All of us fall short. Some fall very short. And just to require high school students to pass a test similar or the same as those that people becoming U.S. citizens pass, that's a good first step. And we're going to talk about it with him a lot more. So stay with us for more of Point of View. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
A precedent was established when President Trump released the transcript of a conversation between President Zelensky and him on July 25th. Yes, I know that it isn't a word-for-word transcript, but it does give you a good idea of what was said on the conversation, even though many politicians and most of the media misrepresented it. Most press reports have ellipses between the two statements by the president. Those 3 dots represent a deletion of 560 words. But my main point is that we now have a sitting president releasing a transcript of a conversation with a foreign leader. I've seen a number of pundits express concern that this will affect future conversations foreign leaders will have with this president and future presidents. We now have members of Congress wanting to see other transcripts of conversations Trump has had with foreign leaders. The damage has been done, so I'm in favor of releasing past transcripts. We would love to know what President Obama said to Russian President Vladimir Putin. After all, we already have comments that Obama whispered on an open microphone to then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. Obama reminded him, "This is my last election." Then he added, "After my election, I have more flexibility." Let's get the transcripts of the phone conversations between Obama and Putin. I'm sure there are lots of interesting tidbits that the American people need to know, and you can't argue that this would be covered by executive privilege. Obama is out of office. Let's get the transcripts related to the Iran nuclear deal. Let's read what President Obama and Secretary Kerry promised the leaders of Iran. When did they offer to send $1.7 billion in cash on a plane to Iran? The transcripts would answer lots of questions. We're all waiting to see them. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, and we're always talking about how the Constitution is under attack, or we're also talking about how so much of what goes on is unconstitutional. And I think the reason we're in that situation is partly because we don't know what the Constitution says. And among young people, we're seeing this support for socialism. We scratch our heads kind of saying, well, do they not teach in school what socialism is, what full socialism, i.e. communism is, how many people have been killed because of it? And then one other problem, and that is the illiteracy among people. National polling, and our next guest mentions this, shows that only 26% of Americans can name the three branches of government. And that's down from 38% in 2011. That's from the Annenberg Public Policy Center. So how do we address all of this sort of civil illiteracy, constitutional illiteracy? And the state of Texas has actually taken this up and done something about it. With me to discuss it is Tom Lindsay, Ph.D. He is a director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation's Center for Innovation in Education. He's also a senior constitutional scholar. Tom, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
What about this problem of sort of constitutional and civic illiteracy among the culture, how is it affecting us?
Oh, it is affecting us in many ways, and unfortunately all of them are disastrous. And to lay this out, let me start by saying this is not the fault of our students. This is the fault of the adults who are supposed to be in charge and teach our students. So having said that, going back almost 50 years, colleges and universities began no longer to require the study of the Constitution, no longer to require the study of Western civilization. According to U.S. Department of Education statistics, today, only 1 in 3 college students graduates with even one course in American government. And why? Because universities are no longer requiring it. So we shouldn't be surprised that there's a civic illiteracy crisis in this country. And let me tell you how deep it goes. The U.S. citizenship test which all immigrants have to take to become American citizens, consists of only 10 multiple choice questions. You only have to get 6 right. One of the questions is, who's the current president? Not surprisingly, 91% of immigrants pass it. First time. But
You mean they get 6 out of 10?
they do, yes.
Okay.
Right. Look, any 7th grader should be able to pass this test. And good for the new immigrants, they pass it 91%. But only 36% of native-born Americans can get even 6 out of 10 right. And when you drill down deeper into the numbers, Penna, what you find is even more disturbing. 74% of senior citizens can pass the test, but only 20% of native-born Americans under the age of 45 can even get 6 out of 10 right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's not just college, Tom, though. I mean,
No, it's not just college.
yeah, it
That's
even
right.
goes lower. And I'm so I was pleased to see, and you brought this up, that the Texas legislature has actually done something about this.
They have, and we're very happy about that. And you're right, it's not just college; it's K-12, but that doesn't relieve the colleges of responsibility because, after all, they're the ones who train the K-12 teachers.
Right.
Right.
And also, well, I mean, I think in college sometimes it's so focused on what you're going to come out with, what career you're going to go into. So there's not this broad-based education that you get when you go to college anymore, like there used to be, which I think that needs to be brought back too.
No, that's right. What we've seen in the last 50 years is the abandonment of a required core curriculum in which all students, regardless of major, regardless of the job they hope for, they're all going to be citizens, and they're all going to be leaders, they're all going to be voters, so they all had to take American government, and they all had to take Western civilization. That no longer is the case, and that's produced the problem. So we here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, rather than simply curse the darkness, we want to light a candle. And so we worked and supported legislation that was signed by the governor just earlier this spring. What it'll do is this. All Texas high school students in their junior year, virtually all of them, take U.S. history. And then they take the STAR end-of-course exam in U.S. history. What our bill does, it embeds 10 questions from the U.S. citizenship test into the STAR end-of-course exam for the juniors. Now, thanks to Commissioner Morath of the Texas Education Agency, anybody right now can go online and find out what questions were asked on each of those tests and how the students in the aggregate did. So, with the passage of this new law, we will be able to find out how Texas students do on the citizenship test. And if they do anywhere near to the dismal results in the rest of the country, then that will support our subsequent legislation that will argue that we need to return to a study of American government which emphasizes the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and the Lincoln-Douglas debates, because that's a real civic education.
So I think if it's on the STAR test, the teachers are going to teach at least the answers to those 10 questions. But, is there any way to measure beyond that? Because I think you're right. We need to go back to those things in high school.
We do. Now, the teachers won't know which 10 questions.
Oh, they won't.
But there's a 100-question database. The 10 are going to be one of those 100.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's a low bar. Well, let me step back. We thought it was a low bar till we found out that 20% of those under 45 can't pass it. So at least that's a step forward. The bill, in essence, is a diagnostic bill, but this is a diagnosis. I don't think you have to be a brain surgeon to figure out that the patient is ill already.
Yeah. Now let's get back before we go to the break, and then we can pick it up afterwards to college again, because we touched on how college has changed. We don't have these core curricula, but instead we have what you've called, and I love the term, which is comfort college. What is that?
Yeah. That is a college that is designed to remove any obstacles and any hurt feelings and any discomfort that you might have. So think of it as a 4 to 6 year taxpayer subsidized spa.
Great. I know. They are kind of like
that's what we've
spas.
got
When
to-
you go and look
yeah.
at the dormitories and the gyms, they are like spas.
I took my son his first year at State University. The apartment he went into was. I told him this is better than what your mom and I moved into when we got married.
Yeah. Amen to that. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
And those are,
It is
I mean,
a-
I think those things are just fine, but, not at the expense of a good education and one that actually goes to the whole person. And I think that's where we're missing out a lot. But also, Tom, students that go in that are from families that are either Christian or just very conservative, that hold to very traditional morals and values, they often have actually they're either penalized or they're very fearful of expressing
Yes.
their beliefs. And so it's maybe comfort college for some people, but not for others.
No, that is an excellent point, and there is national polling that shows that a majority of college students, regardless of where they fall on the ideological spectrum, a majority of college students today now answer in polls that, yes, there are things that people can't say on campus. They recognize, even if they're not conservative, even if they're not Christian, a majority of college students recognize that free thought has been locked down at too many campuses today.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have posted at pointofview.net an article by Tom Lindsay. New report. Most college students agree that campus free speech is waning. So you can go there and check out that article. And he starts out, too many students feel afraid to speak honestly on campus for fear of offending someone, a new national survey of college students says. And, but it's not just offending someone sometimes, Tom. It goes, there's punishment that goes beyond that in some cases, isn't there?
Sure. I mean, a number of universities have what are called bias response teams, where they go around trying to sniff out bias. And, of course, under the university's definition of bias, that can also consist in what they call microaggressions. And what microaggressions are is when you say something that you didn't intend to hurt someone's feelings, but it does, and you're just as guilty. And you can be reported for this. George Orwell is turning over in his grave.
We've spent a good part of this segment talking about the Constitution and civics. And in one sense, the First Amendment is also suffering on campuses. We're going to talk about that after the break with Tom Lindsay. You might want to go to pointofview.net during the break and check out this article. The donate button is also there. Stay with us. We've got more with Tom Lindsay from Texas Public Policy Foundation. We'll be right back.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And my guest by phone is Tom Lindsay, PhD. He is director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation's Center for Innovation in Education and a senior constitutional scholar. And, you know, when you talk about innovation, Tom, innovation and improvement to me would be going back to some of the old ways we used to do things.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, because, you know, it seems like some of the things that used to work in educating people are being left behind in favor of, for lack of a better word, political correctness. But
yes,
these comfort
right.
colleges are just such a sign of that.
Oh, that's exactly right. I mean, it's, you know, and here's the real tragedy of this. All of us know, all of us who are adults, and even some who are not yet adults, know that we grow the most through times of struggle. We grow the most in reaction to failure. But today, in our therapeutic society, our schools are set against letting students fail. And what that means is they infantilize our students so that they emerge from college not much more mature than they were when they went into it, because they haven't had to struggle. And struggle is the soil from which the human virtues grow.
So part of that, of course, I guess part of the struggle would be to receive or hear information, have to digest information that you may not agree with based on your life and what you've learned earlier in life. And, you know, always we considered college something that was a time where you would hear competing ideas, where you would learn to analyze them, where you would learn to make your beliefs that maybe you were taught by your parents, make them your own or maybe reject them. But you can't do that without hearing competing ideas. And yet that's not what's happening on many campuses now.
No, that's right. It's not what's happening. In fact, our universities, which should be the most tolerant places in the country, are becoming among the least tolerant places. Here's the connection between free speech and civics education. They're two sides of the same coin. You have to be able to speak freely. You have to be able to disagree if you ever hope to learn how to be free. Now, learning how to be free is what civics education is. But if you don't have free speech, you are never going to achieve that end. And that's why both of these things, both free speech and civics education, are under assault in our universities.
So instead of First Amendment and free speech, the emphasis on inclusion,
yes.
Correct? So
That's
talk a little
right.
bit more about that.
Well, the argument is that free speech, the First Amendment, is destructive of the rights of minorities and those that are oppressed. And yet, again, if our universities would get back to teaching and stop indoctrinating, if you look at the history of the Black Civil Rights Movement in the 50s and the 60s, you will see that it could not have achieved its ends, were it not for the First Amendment. The very First Amendment that now our universities are telling us, oh, we don't need that anymore.
Interesting. So, you know, even the studies, like you, in this piece that I have posted, and folks, you can get it at pointofview.net. And also, I might mention, when you go to pointofview.net, you can also click through to Texas Public Policy Foundation. There is so much there. They cover lots of different issues. But I'm glad you're here, Tom, because you talk about this report from the Knight Foundation. And students, in a sense, maybe because they haven't been taught about the importance of the First Amendment before, they don't think it's important either.
Right. And how would they know? Right? I mean, we're not born knowing this stuff. They're not being taught it. In fact, they're being taught the opposite of it. So what do we expect? They are simply what we have made them into.
And so some of these, but then they also are recognizing that they don't have rights to speak freely. And the same study you point out says 68% of collegians largely agree that the campus climate today prevents some students from being able to truly speak their minds. Only 31% disagree. So it's a lack of freedom. It's conformism of thought the exact opposite of what we expect to see in college, and they go out handicapped, don't they?
Oh, they do. They do. I mean, look, they leave. A national study was done in 2011. It looked at 2,300 college students across the country, and it followed them from their freshman year through their senior year. It's under a study called Academically Adrift, and what they found is that 36% of college students, after 4 years invested in college, show statistically no increase in critical thinking, in complex reasoning, or in writing skills. It's as if they hadn't even been there.
So, Tom, I mean, just practically, because we have a lot of parents listening to the program, and if you've got kids and you're saving up the hundreds of thousands of dollars that, you're supposed to spend on your kids' education if you're a good parent, right? Or, figuring out a way for them to go to college. What do you suggest? I mean, are there colleges you suggest? Do you suggest certain pre-college preparation? Do you suggest no college?
Well, it depends on the person, but I would say, generally speaking, most people should go to a community college for their first 2 years, because sad to say, there's not a lot of difference between the first 2 years in a community college and at a lot of other schools. Now, it's not true of all schools, but it's true of the great majority of schools today. So that'd be the first thing I'd say. Look at community college if that's the direction you want to go. But something else I would point out to them, that well, people have been making much of the college premium for the last 50 years, and that was true 50 years ago, but as more and more people get degrees, that premium goes down and down and down. So what I would say to them is this. Stats today, when we look at them, we find that the top 90% of starting salaries from community colleges are equal to the bottom 90% of starting salaries from four-year colleges. So then the question is, okay, well, what's that top 10% at the 4 years that makes where you make a lot of money? Answer, only those majors that require 2 college-level calculus courses.
Really?
Now, yeah. So if that's not the road you're going down, you might want to think about something other than a 4-year traditional college.
That's very interesting advice, and I've seen it play out in some families. Or, the other part of it is you get prepared, you get internships. Along the way, you don't just count on your college degree to be the thing that gets you there. You have to do lots of other things to prepare yourself for a career. So, folks, give us a call if you have a question for Tom, 800-351-1212. Tom, I want to ask you very quickly here. Add a subject. It's related, but this whole New York Times story about I think it's the 1619 Project.
Yes,
where
that's
they're
what
trying.
It's called.
Yeah, they're trying to indoctrinate their readers, which are becoming fewer, thankfully.
Yes,
that our country really started when the first slaves came to this land, and that we are, in essence, one of our main characteristics as a nation is that we are racist, and that we began that way and we are still that way.
No, that's right. I mean, that's why they want to date America's founded at 1619, because that's the date that they believe the first slaves were brought to the colonies, although they're wrong. The Spanish brought some about 50 years earlier. But putting that to the side, for the writers of the New York Times, slavery is the most important fact about America, which is absolutely astounding given the fact that our Declaration of Independence begins with the statement that's a repudiation of slavery. That's why Thomas Jefferson said, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just." So this is an absolute overturning of history in order to present the United States in the worst possible light. That's the purpose, because if you can make a people, the American people, feel guilty, as we all know, when you feel guilty, you don't defend yourself. You don't stand up for yourself. You're much more obedient, and that's exactly what they want.
Yeah, sometimes, and, I should have you back sometime just to talk about the reason for the way education has gone the way it has. But in some sense, I've always felt in looking at it that some on the left would really like to see our whole educational system create a compliant culture, not necessarily a well-educated culture, but a compliant culture is more important to them. And that may be the reason we're seeing some of these trends.
Yes, yes.
Okay, well, we will have to do that another time. It'll be probably a full-hour discussion. So I hope you'll agree to come back and do that.
I look forward to it. Absolutely.
Right.
I look forward to it.
Great, Tom. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. And thank you for all the work that you do, the great work you do at the Texas Public Policy Foundation.
Well, thank you for having me on the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Tom Lindsay. And, this is an important subject. We at Point of View have always been concerned about education and our educational system, improving it, and also helping conservative and Christian parents figure out what to do for their own kids. Sometimes it's not the same thing that everyone else does. So, those are topics that we can address at another time. Homeschooling is certainly one of those. But stay with us. We've got more here on Point of View.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. In the next segment, we're going to talk with Erica Komisar, and she is a psychoanalyst. Several of her pieces have been appeared in the Wall Street Journal. I always appreciate and enjoy them. And she's got a book called Being There, Why Providing Motherhood in the First 3 Years, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters. I would contend it's more than 3 years, but the first 3 years, she has actual medical and psychological reasons for that. And she goes on to try to encourage mothers because she finds that in her practice, in her psychological practice, she's getting women in there who are so conflicted. They have a baby and they're very career minded, perhaps successful or on the fast track, and they have a baby and then their plan is to go back, but they're very divided and conflicted. I've seen this in many young women, and they don't want to leave their child. And so there's this guilt that comes on both sides of it. Guilt for perhaps not going back, or guilt for going back and you're leaving your child at home. And she wants to help sort of encourage women to that staying at home model. And, perhaps you're going to sacrifice something with regard to your career. But anyway, I'm not going to try to explain what she has to say because she does it so well. She'll be joining us in the next hour, and that will be a fun interview. You won't want to miss it. I mentioned earlier the Louisiana abortion law that the Supreme Court is taking, and I just want to go back a little bit and explain it because this comes out of the Wall Street Journal. Court to review Louisiana abortion law. They agreed to review these restrictions, and they require doctors to hold hospital admitting privileges near where the procedure is provided. The law was enacted in 2014. It says physicians performing abortions must hold admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles. And abortion rights proponents who challenged it say that this provides no actual health and safety benefits for women seeking abortions. No, not unless you have a problem in that abortion. Then it does provide protection. And how many stories have we heard about women being harmed in abortion? This is not just about saving babies. That's a very important part of the pro-life movement. It's also about protecting women. And so that's what this does. So, the feminists who oppose this because they want to see abortion remain legal and they worry about Roe versus Wade, they really don't need to worry here. This does not challenge Roe versus Wade, but what it does is it admits, and perhaps this is what they're afraid of, it admits that abortion can be dangerous to women. They try to say it's safer than pregnancy, but not always. And, I start to look at this and think, what kind of doctor who's been to medical school really wants to do abortions anyway? So perhaps these aren't the best doctors anyway doing it. Abortion rights proponents say that, I already mentioned this, but the case is really the first time the court will consider abortion rights since we've had a different court. Anthony Kennedy is certainly a step down. We now have 2 Trump appointees, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, who have been approved. So how are they going to rule in this? And is this going to actually be, this law going to be much more likely to be upheld because of them? And it's not whether or not we're going to overturn Roe. That's really not what they'll be considering here in this particular litigation and this challenge. But, says the Journal, the case could provide an early test of whether a more conservative court will take a narrower view of what constitutes an undue burden on women seeking abortions. That's, of course, the test that was established in the 1992 opinion that basically... it was basically almost like a second Roe versus Wade, affirming the right to abortion. So the law is similar to the Texas law, and that's why a lot of folks are wondering why, anyone thinks that it will be upheld now. But there are some signs that it might. And let's see, the Louisiana law, they're saying, would not oppose the same burdens as those in Texas. Judges in the majority in that 2-1 decision said that the law was not burdensome because only one doctor at one Louisiana clinic is currently unable to obtain admitting privileges. And there's no evidence that any clinics would close because of this, unlike the state of Texas. So that was one difference. The majority also concluded that unlike in Texas, driving distances for women seeking abortions in Louisiana would not increase. So this is the opinion of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans, which also upheld the Louisiana law. They stayed the law, so it's not been enforced, but now it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and we will see what happens. And it would certainly be a victory, and maybe the beginning of other restrictions on abortion and also maybe some challenges to Roe versus Wade. Let's see what else. Americans for United for Life said that this is the first opportunity to speak to the abortion issue since the whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt decision 3 years ago. And potentially it will affect the continued viability of the so-called constitutional right to abortion. And this is from Americans United for Life. Their statement is they welcome the Supreme Court decision to review both the common sense Louisiana admitting privileges law and the legal question whether an abortion should be able to stand in the shoes of his patients to challenge a medical requirement that is designed to protect them from him. That's a good point coming from Catherine Glenn Foster of Americans United for Life. Should an abortionist be able to defend, to challenge a requirement that's meant to protect his patients from him? So you can see why they fight. You can understand why they fight these common sense restrictions on abortion. And so anyway, we're going to talk about this more with our guest tomorrow because Chris Town is going to come. I think he's coming into the studio. He's going to join me. He's from he's from Texas Right to Life. He will talk a little bit about the 40 Days for Life effort that's going on. And we'll also talk about some of these on the national level, some of these developments in the life issue. And the case, let's see if I can find this. Well, I guess that's all we really have to say about that right now. But you ought to be praying for the Supreme Court on this. There are some interesting cases before the Supreme Court that affect some of the things that believers and conservatives in America really care about. So this is going to be a very interesting session and perhaps a very good one with some new justices on the court. Over the weekend, I was at a conference and I actually heard from, one of the speakers I heard was Leonard Leo. He was the person who wrote the list that President Trump has been working from in appointing judges and Supreme Court justices. And he talked about how surprised he was that, first of all, that President Trump wanted such a list, and he and the Federalist Society put that together, but that he has stuck to that list, actually asked to have it be expanded because now there have been 153 judges and justices appointed to the courts by President Trump, which is a huge amount. He was surprised pleasantly, as we all were in the audience, and as you should be, because the future of many of the values that we hold so dear and of our Constitution is at stake, and it's in better hands because of the judges that President Trump has appointed and who are on the bench for life. So that's on that good note, we will end this segment, and we hope you'll stick with us for the next one. I think you're going to enjoy our guest. Stay with us for a lot more of Point of View. You won't want to miss it.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dyes would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kirby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penna Dexter and Kirby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. You know, despite all the talk of impeachment, I am just so excited and on a real high, even politically, because I'm coming off of a conference that I attended over the weekend. And one of the highlights of this conference, and it was all on politics and the issues that face us, and certainly there's some depressing things, but there was a highlight, and that was on Saturday, Vice President Pence actually came and addressed our group. And it was, first of all, you have to, when you have like someone from the administration that's that high up in the administration come to speak to you, you have to get into the area where you're going to have the event take place and go through security and stay in there and for at least a couple of hours before the person comes. Everyone has to do that. And then they bring all kinds of people in and make sure everything's safe and free of threats. And so that's what we did. And we got in very early. And of course, there was a lot going on, other speakers and things, and even food waiting for the vice president. But it was such a wonderful moment when he walked in. And one of the reasons is he has addressed this group before over the years as congressman and when he was in the House of Representatives, but never as vice president. To have him come in like this, a person, because these are all conservatives and mostly Christians, to have one of us come and speak with us, it was so exciting. And he was complimentary of various leaders in the audience. He knew a lot of the people there already. And one of those people that he called out was our own Kelly Shackelford. He complimented him on the Bladensburg Cross victory at the Supreme Court, and also on because he had actually appeared at the VFW convention where they talked about the missing man tables and the places where there's been a fight over if you're allowed to put a Bible there on these tables. And they're POW tables, and so Bibles have been part of the display, and First Liberty Institute has been actually defending the right of the families to put that person's Bible there on that table, and that the VA has opened up to that thanks to the efforts of First Liberty Institute and others. But so Vice President Pence was complimentary of Kelly on that, and just on that victory, and it was just all the negative that we hear in the news, and then having him come and just kind of summarize the accomplishments of the administration. It was almost like it's two different universes. And so, he was talking about what has been done. For instance, the rebuilding of the military. When you think of some of the progress since the previous administration, the rebuilding of the military, the reviving of the economy. For 8 years, we never grew by more than 2%. And then the fact that our administration, our president, stands up for America on the world stage and doesn't apologize for America. The first summit for religious liberty that ever happened, and 120 conferences attended. This was just recently, a couple weeks ago at the UN. That all of ISIS territory has been captured. that we are out of the Iran deal, that the embassy in Israel, the Israeli embassy our embassy in Israel has been moved to Jerusalem, away from Tel Aviv, something that many previous administrations promised, and this one did. That there's been a 60% drop in apprehensions at the border in the last couple of months. So all the battling over the border, and certainly Congress needs to act, but they've just pushed forward on that. They're building the wall, he says, and Mexico has a role. Mexico's role in now holding asylum seekers and others in Mexico, the Remain in Mexico initiative that Trump insisted on. 153 judges appointed to the federal bench across, from the Supreme Court on down. Let's see what else. Pence says we will always defend religious freedom. And again, he called out the Cross case, the Peace Cross in Maryland, the Bladensburg Cross, and the VA hospital victory. He said he talked about how this president is the most pro-life president ever, and certainly Mike Pence has always been a standard bearer for the sanctity of human life. So that got some applause. The tie-breaking vote. He actually cast the tie-breaking vote to allow states to defund Planned Parenthood. That was early on in the administration. And then he talked about socialism. And he said, if we become socialist, we cease to be America. He said it's time to double down. We have to talk about the record a lot from now until the election. And then he asked for everyone to pray for them. They need prayer. And I do pray for the administration. I pray for President Trump every day. They have to not care sometimes about all the slings and arrows, and they just have to move forward. And this, I cried a couple times during the speech because, number one, it's wonderful to see Mike Pence there. I just really admire him. And Andrew, you will remember that he gave us so much time when he was in the House of Representatives here at Point of View. He would come on the show. He would be part of our news, and we got to interview him and find out about all kinds of issues and battles that were being fought. And he was so good with his time. He was number 3 in the House of Representatives for several years. He declined to run for the Senate from Indiana to take a seat that was open that he would have won because he wanted to stay in the House and he had a few more things to do. And after that, he went to be governor of Indiana, and then he was chosen by Trump to be his running mate. And so I don't know. When I see people that really love God and are believers and have the right values and are good communicators, I get very excited about that. And so that was the emotion that was coming up during that speech. But to hear all of those accomplishments synthesized into, just a few minutes, it was encouraging. And I think it's something that we have to remember, ladies and gentlemen, as we go through this election season and also the battles and the talk about impeachment, because we just have to remember what's at stake. And there is a lot at stake, and there is the ability to win on a lot of fronts, but we have to stay in it. We have to stay in the battle, and we have to support the folks that are doing it, not only in prayer, but also with any way we can through the election process. And that's going to ramp up now in the next few months, and it's just about a year, and we'll be electing a new president, many senators, all the congressmen, and a lot of people in the state, in state government. So this is an important year. And I was encouraged over the weekend, and I want to encourage you, maybe try to pass some of that on to you. Well, next up, we've got a great guest. I'm excited about this interview with Erica Komisar. And you need to think about the culture. Our families and our kids are at the bottom line of that. So we're going to talk about that after this. Stay with us for more of Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
precedent was established when President Trump released the transcript of a conversation between President Zelensky and him on July 25th. Yes, I know that it isn't a word-for-word transcript, but it does give you a good idea of what was said on the conversation, even though many politicians and most of the media misrepresented it. Most press reports have ellipses between the two statements by the president. Those 3 dots represent a deletion of 560 words. But my main point is that we now have a sitting president releasing a transcript of a conversation with a foreign leader. I've seen a number of pundits express concern that this will affect future conversations foreign leaders will have with this president and future presidents. We now have members of Congress wanting to see other transcripts of conversations Trump has had with foreign leaders. The damage has been done, so I'm in favor of releasing past transcripts. We would love to know what President Obama said to Russian President Vladimir Putin. After all, we already have comments that Obama whispered on an open microphone to then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. Obama reminded him, "This is my last election." Then he added, "After my election, I have more flexibility." Let's get the transcripts of the phone conversations between Obama and Putin. I'm sure there are lots of interesting tidbits that the American people need to know, and you can't argue that this would be covered by executive privilege. Obama is out of office. Let's get the transcripts related to the Iran nuclear deal. Let's read what President Obama and Secretary Kerry promised the leaders of Iran. When did they offer to send $1.7 billion in cash on a plane to Iran? The transcripts would answer lots of questions. We're all waiting to see them. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I am Penna Dexter, and if you've been listening to Point of View a long time, you probably know that I am an advocate of women staying home and raising their kids for as much time as possible. That's just been me. That's what I did. Even though I worked, that was my priority. And sometimes that is a hard position to hold in this culture and this society. And I know that, there's a lot of pressure on women. Most women who are moms are conflicted. They have guilt. They have guilt whether they're at work. They have guilt whether they're at home. And I think that my next guest is going to help perhaps relieve some of that guilt or at least encourage people in what I really think is the right direction. But her name is Erica Komisar, and she is a social worker, psychoanalyst, a parent guidance expert. She's been in private practice in New York City for the last 28 years. She graduated from Georgetown and Columbia universities, and she's now an author also, and that's what got my attention. Her book is Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters. She's appeared in a lot of media, and she's been with me before. I saw a piece about her in the Wall Street Journal, but now I see from time to time pieces, Erica, that you've written appear in the journal, and I love it because it's all wisdom. This latest one, A Woman Doesn't Need an Office to Be Empowered. I want you to explain that. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me today. The pieces that I write, and I do recognize the privilege of being able to write in the journal and also write on these issues, because I think a lot of the journal is
business and politics, and they make room for these messages. And the message is really, having worked both in the nonprofit and for-profit world and working with a lot of women who work in both worlds, the word empowerment is thrown around a lot. And generally, it's thrown around in reference to women becoming high-powered and working in office jobs and becoming CEOs. And it always bothered me because, as you know, from the books that I write and the articles I write and the work that I do, I think mothering and nurturing, and that could include nurturing a spouse who's ill or a parent. And nurturing is a very empowering thing. That's what the piece is about, how you don't need, that the term empowerment should not be reserved to just working outside the home and making money.
So a part of this, the bold kind of tease for this is a patient told me, because you're always counseling patients, I feel pressured to leave my children and return to meaningful work. That is thrown out, like what you do at home is not meaningful.
Yeah. And again, those are the messages of society, social media. I think of old-time feminism. I think the new feminism has more room for more nuance, but the old feminism was if you're not out in the world and you're not working out in the world away from your children and making money and lots of money and gaining status out in the world, that you were not valuable to society. And I think what's happened is, we're 3 generations or even 4 into this message. So I think now spouses of women, parents of women who, advocated, you go to the best schools and you get the best jobs and you get the most high-powered, jobs, and then women will have a baby. And they'll fall in love with that baby, and they'll instinctually feel that they want to stay home with that baby longer. And their spouses will say, you made a deal. You told me you'd earn a lot of money. Their parents say, but you got that fancy degree. So these are my patients are feeling very conflicted inside because their instincts are telling them, I want to nurture this baby. I want to stay home longer with this baby. Or I want to work part-time. I don't want to work as intensely. I want to be there physically and emotionally as much as possible. But all of the messages are around them and all the people around them are not necessarily supporting that.
Yes. Now, some people have critiqued your position on this and said, well, I have to work financially, and that you certainly recognize that some people actually have to have 2 incomes because one's not enough. But what's your encouragement to those? I just want to start with them because that's real. That is real. Yeah, it is real. And I always say that many women have to work. I think our society doesn't really value as much as it should helping women to think about the kind of work that they do. Women who are raising children need, or I'm just going to include all kind of caretaking in this, whether you're caring for an elderly parent or a sick spouse or a child. Women need control and flexibility in their lives. So to balance things, and we love to use that term, right, balancing work and family, they need control and flexibility. Not all jobs have a lot of control and flexibility to them. Not all, jobs, not all careers. So, I always recognize that some women have to work, which is why I've always advocated for paid maternity leave, which we have none of in this country. We're the only civilized country in the world that doesn't have paid maternity leave on a national scale. And, I have been interviewed by an organization like the Independent Women's Forum, which advocates for using Social Security to pay for the paid maternity leave. I mean, there's lots of solutions. And I've always said that one of the solutions is, why don't we help women with entrepreneurship when they're mothers? Why don't we have organizations or even the government, sponsor the idea of teaching women how to build small businesses where they can have more control and flexibility and be able to be with their children more, or work flexibly. I also work with a lot of organizations that support flexibility and part-time work for women. There's a lot of solutions to women who have to work, and I've always advocated for any number of solutions for those women. But the idea is that whether you have to work or don't have to work,
We all have some choice. We may not all have the same choices. We have to maximize our choice in this case to be there as much as possible with our children.
Yeah, and sometimes it's, you haven't thought it through before you've had the child, and you're thinking it through when that child is here, because all of a sudden you're a mom, and it's different. It's just very different for you. So I don't know. This is what I taught my daughter. I have one daughter and two sons. That some of the things that you think you want to have, just material things. Yeah. If you learn how to even budget, I mean, this is just kind of bottom line basic budgeting, that you might find that you don't have to work as much as you thought you had to. You start looking at maybe how much you spend on, dinners out or things like that, that perhaps, you don't, staying home with your child, you don't need to spend as much on certain things, clothing, things like that. What about that?
Yeah, some of it is what you prioritize, right? So the name of my book is, Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood. If motherhood or parenting is a priority, we say life is long, and so decompressing some of your work in those years when your children are the smallest and need you the most. And then knowing that, as I said, life is long and you can pick up speed at another point. You can do everything in life. You just can't do it all at the same time. So I think the idea that we don't necessarily, I think women and men make promises to one another before they've had babies. And I always say to my patients, don't make promises. You don't know how you're going to feel. Wait, really don't make those promises and strategize so you have enough flexibility to make either decision, because you may have this baby, as many of my patients have, and they've built a whole lifestyle around a certain amount of income, and they're trapped. We say platinum handcuffs. They're trapped in a life where they are now valuing their material life and their things and their apartments and their houses and their cars and their vacations over being able to be home with their children. And that's separate from women who really working-class women who must work. And for those women, we need paid maternity leave, and we need part-time and flexible opportunities. We need to have some policies, too. But, yeah, I don't think we think as a society about planning for this event. I think women and young men think that they're going to have a baby and everything's going to go back to exactly the way it was before they had the baby. And it never goes. Your life will never go back to what it was, both emotionally and or materially.
After the break, I want to talk about what has been some of the repercussions of moms not being in the home. That you see in the culture and the society. That'll be one of the things we talk about. But I just want to quote one thing from the article as we go to a break. She says, most frustrating, there is little recognition that being a mom and raising children is the most important kind of work and leadership. Being a mom is actually very important, and it is a leadership role, and every house needs a leader. That's another concept we will discuss after the break. Stay with us for more of Point of View. My guest is Erica Komisar.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
We are talking about the priority women in the culture today place on motherhood. How much do they place on motherhood versus career? And is the balance as it should be today? Our guest is Erica Komisar. Her book, Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters, was one that really struck me and really garnered my attention. I want to open up the phones, 800-351-1212. If you would like to discuss this issue of motherhood, staying home so that you can raise your kids full time, are we bullying people by encouraging people to do that? When I say we, it's really me. I think that's the best way, and I've raised 3 kids and chose to do that. Sometimes you can combine working with staying home, or you can work part-time. You can work it out. We're smart people. So we're just kind of mushing that all together and trying to make some common sense out of it. So we'd love to hear from you, 800-351-1212. Erica, I want to ask you, before the break, I sort of teased this, but what do you see in our culture? Because we've had a couple of generations, one generation really, where we've said it's okay for women not to be home, that you can get all kinds of other help and daycare and go out and have your job. And it was encouraged by the feminists, but now people are starting to see that perhaps that's not all it was cracked up to be. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the reason I wrote the book that I did is because in my practice, I was seeing this epidemic of mental disorders in very young children through adolescence, but really starting as early as 2 years old, things like signs of ADHD, aggressive behavior, depression, anxiety in very young children. And I was becoming concerned, and because I was connecting it in my practice, in the cases in my practice, to the absence of mothers in children's lives on a daily basis. And so I started looking at the research, and then for 13 years, I basically read all of the neuroscience, epigenetics, attachment research, and all the psychoanalytic papers I could find on the subject, and then decided to write a book about it because what I found in the research backed up what I was seeing, which is that mothers are not just emotionally necessary to the development of children's right or social emotional brains and mental health, but they're biologically necessary, meaning women do this kind of emotional regulation. Mothers are, I will say, primary caregivers, but mothers are unique in this role that they play, which is they regulate baby's emotions. Every time a mother soothes the baby from moment to moment, she's actually biologically regulating that baby's emotions. She's helping to bring that baby back to what we call emotional homeostasis. And so it's a constant moment-to-moment process. By the end of that 3-year period, 85% of a child's right brain, or their ability to regulate their emotions going forward into the future, is developed. And the same with stress regulation. So what we know is that a baby is not equipped to cope with separation and the stress due to separation under the age of 3 to the degree that we are putting them in that position. So to build stress resilience, mothers do this other biological thing, which is they buffer children from stress from moment to moment, and not until the end of that 3-year period can children then become resilient to stress. So these are biological functions. So it isn't me saying, this isn't an opinion, it's not a politically incorrect opinion. It's based on research. I mean, if you read the book, you can see that it's really based on all of this research, as well as what I see clinically.
Give us a call, 800-351-1212, if you'd like to ask a question about this. Erica, can you buy a replacement for yourself?
So again, whoever that baby is primarily attached to, and in this country it's mostly the mother, right? So the mother is the primary attachment figure for that baby. And the idea is that the primary attachment figure has a unique role to that baby. They are the go-to person for that baby's emotional security. So, if I say to a mother, you're important to that baby in a unique way and you're not generic, separate from this separation issue, they will say, of course I am. Of course I'm unique. Of course that baby sees me as different than the nanny or the babysitter or the daycare worker. But then when I confront that mother with the fact that when that baby is in daycare, you are not there providing that emotional security, then comes the defensiveness. So if you ask any mother, is she unique to her baby in terms of that baby's attachment? I think for the most part, mothers would say, yes, of course I am, until it comes to this issue. And then they say, well, anybody can do it. And I'm going to say, no, anybody can't do it. It doesn't work that way because you are the go-to person for that child's emotional security. So as I say, some women have to work, but we say more is more. The more emotionally and physically there you can be, the better off your baby will be.
I saw that you do recommend, if you have to work, that a family member be the one to provide most of the care for the child.
Yeah.
Can you explain why that's the case?
Yeah. So we say that, grandmothers, aunts, your next door neighbor who you call aunt, extended family, as well as, directly your family, have the most similar kind of emotional investment in your baby as you do. I mean, not exactly the same. As I said, it's not generic, but we say in other countries they practice something called alloparenting, which is that there are multiple attachment figures for children. If you go to Africa and India, where I travel to and observe mothers and babies, you can see that there are many people that help to care for that baby and support the mother, right? There's a circle of support around the mother. The difference in other countries is what they call alloparenting. The mother is still the central primary caregiver who helps the baby when they're in distress. So if you go to Africa, you'll see the baby goes to the grandmother, the father, the grandfather when the baby is happy in a state of emotional homeostasis. But when the baby is in distress, the family member quite easily gives the baby back to the mother to regulate the baby. When the baby's happy, the baby can then go back to the brother or the sister or the grandmother. So what we have distorted in this country and call alloparenting and say, oh, see, other countries have other attachment figures, is that we don't then compute that the baby, when they're in distress, is now not with their source of emotional security.
Wow. Okay, I have folks, call in if you have like a personal issue you want to ask about. I'm going to just mention mine because I have 5 grandchildren that live near me, and I see them a lot, and I help watch them, and they know me very well. They're in my home a lot. And I find that sometimes when they get to my house, they cry and they're upset. They're little until their parents walk out the door, and then they're fine. Why is that?
Yeah. Well, so the idea is that children have defenses, and and what we're relying on is that children can adapt to this separation. And the truth is that all children do have some ability to adapt, but what we're doing by forcing separation on them so very early is that we're forcing them into this adaptive defensive position, which is, again, that's what attachment disorders are based on. Attachment disorders, insecure attachment disorders, and, basically we need a secure attachment to become emotionally and mentally healthy. There are these disorders called attachment disorders when the attachment process is interrupted or doesn't happen in a healthy way. And what we know is that children can develop what we call defensive independence, which is a kind of avoidant attachment disorder, which is they will do as you ask them to do. That doesn't mean it's healthy for them. And we know that those early attachment disorders related to avoidance, meaning a baby who just lets the mother walk out the door and doesn't cry or stops crying really quickly, a lot of those children then go on to develop things like depression and difficulty connecting intimately later in life. There are other, I could go through all of the insecure attachment disorders, but what we know is that attachment disorders, which are children's ways to adapt to this early separation, are then connected to some of the mental disorders I am seeing in my practice later on.
Wow. Interesting. Well, I don't want to be contributing to those by being the grandma.
But I'm also going to say that as a grandmother, again, your emotional investment in those children is as close to the mother as possible, the mother and the father. So, the idea is if someone else is going to watch your children, the best thing is to have family or extended family. And then the next best thing would be to have a single surrogate, meaning under the age of one, a babysitter or a next-door neighbor who's a babysitter, but a one-to-one under the age of one, and no more than 3-to-1 between the ages of 1 and 3. That we know as a statistic is the best.
The fewer the
child
better.
care.
The fewer the better.
The fewer the better, yeah, and consistency, right?
Okay.
So the thing about being a grandmother is you are consistently there for that child.
Yes, I am. 800-351-1212 if you want to ask a question. We've got a break here, but this is so fascinating. Next, I'm going to ask about just being a leader in your home. Why is that important? How is that important? How do you do it? We'll be back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We are taking your calls, but first I want to ask my guest, Erica Komisar. Erica, you say that in, I think it's in the book, it may be in one of the articles, that we are leaders in our homes, or every home needs a leader. It's usually the wife and mother. So, we don't need to feel like we're not a leader, even if we're not even working outside the home.
Maybe the most important leader, because it allows the family to function and be functional, not only on an emotional level, but on a logistical level. So, I consider mothers who are stay-at-home or who may work but prioritize their children or homemakers. They are leaders. They are holding together a very complicated family structure. So yes, indeed, women are leaders without having to go to an office and be a CEO.
Sometimes I think if two people have a very responsible jobs that, they've got to prioritize them, and things start falling apart at home. I mean, things do fall apart at home. Somebody has to take care of what's going on at home. I mean, yes, you can pay people to take care of a lot of that, but they can't take care of everything. It's almost like somebody has to be the one that kind of catches all the things that fall down.
Well, if you think about home as the emotional security net for the whole family, even if you're a small family, even if you don't have children, I think the idea is we turn to home as our safety net, as our security net. And it's an emotional security net for children. So, what I say to parents of older children and adolescents is that, yes, you're not needed quite in the same intense way as you are 0 to 3, but actually my next book is on adolescence, which is 9 to 25. And you are still needed, because when that child comes home or that adolescent comes home, they need you in an emotional way, in an organizational way that, may not be apparent to you, but they very much need you, and they need to feel when they come home that there's someone there that is leading, that is driving that car, but also that is someone there to talk to and to open up to. What I say is, if your child's door opens because they want to talk to you in that moment and they come home from school, once it closes and you come in and you want to talk to them, it's on your time, not on their time. So they may not open the door for you when you want to speak to them. So there's so many things that make being a mother a leadership position, and it's so important to be there as much as possible. Yeah.
You can't compartmentalize and say, we'll have this talk later. It just doesn't work all the time.
Well, it will work on your time, but it doesn't. So in the end, if we're going to prioritize children, I mean, I am an advocate for children and mothers, but first children, because really we have to prioritize children. They didn't ask to come into this world, and they have certain needs that are a priority. And one of those needs is the emotional need to have us as present as possible.
Let's go to the phones. Mary is in Arkansas. Hi, Mary. Thanks for calling.
Hi.
What's your question?
Well, I came from a background of 11 brothers and sisters, and my mother was forced to leave when I was 9 months old. And
to go to work?
I was raised by housekeepers. No, I'm 71, so I'm listening to this and I'm going, oh my goodness. So my mother had 11 kids, 3 sets of twins, and we're down to my brother, my older sister Mary Lou. And I can't name all the names. I just remembered I can't do that. I'm being very cautious here.
Okay.
I had a 42-year marriage, and I did everything I could to change everything that happened in my life as a child so that my kids wouldn't go through everything that I went through. And I look back on it, and it still wasn't good enough. And so he was always gone, and it didn't work out.
Okay,
and
but what are you saying about your childhood? Your mom had to leave. Did she have to leave to work?
No. She left because he would come home. And from what I understand, since I was 9 months, that my brother told me that he would beat her up.
Okay.
And so he would stay at the bar, and then he'd come home and beat her up. And she just said, I can't do this anymore, and she left.
Well, that would have repercussions on a child's life for the rest of their life, wouldn't it, Erica?
So, Mary, did you see a lot of effects of that on your siblings and on yourself? I'm sure that's serious trauma, right, if you think about it. And so you lost your mother. I mean, what I was going to say is sometimes in very large families, even without that trauma, just very large families, there will be 1 or 2 siblings that will step up in the place of the mother. and will become the primary caregiver to a younger sibling. And that can often happen. It's not ideal, but it does happen in very large families. But in your case, I mean, we're talking that's obviously major trauma, and I guess I'm asking if you saw some of the effects of that on your siblings over the years.
Well, I'm the youngest. I have a twin sister. But everybody ran away from home in their teens. They didn't get the love they wanted because
I'm so sorry.
Wow.
I'm so sorry, Mary.
Yeah.
Really sorry. And it
I
sounds
kept
like
this
you did
marriage
your...
because I believed in keeping a marriage and it would last. And here I am, 71, and So I was there for my daughter's 2 children because they both had to work. And then my son, he was, well, that was another story. I look back on it and anyways, God's healing me, and that's all that matters.
Mary, thank you so much. Let Erica have the last word on that.
Can I just say one thing, which is one of the things that I advocate for, not only here but abroad, is the idea of Penna, that I write articles against universal daycare supported by the government, and the reason I do that is not because working families don't need care. But I would prefer, as in Finland, that if the government is going to provide some money for care for working families, that they offer to give the choice of that money. It's called a family stipend in Finland, where they offer to give the money to the family. So the working mother, who may make $28,000, can give $14,000, which is what it would cost to put it for the government to pay for daycare, to give it to the family so the family can give it to the grandmother, or so the mother only has to work part-time. So that's one of the things that I advocate. So it sounds, Mary, as though you've tried very hard to kind of improve on the last generation in your family and do it better. And thank you for sharing with us, Mary.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Well, Erica, I'm afraid we can't take the other calls because we're up on the end of the segment, but I hope you'll join me again, because
I will.
This
Anytime.
is one of my favorite topics. I just love talking about this. I appreciate what how you're speaking out. I know that you take slings and arrows, and I hope that you feel welcome here, because
I do.
I did see something where it said that the Christians love me and a lot of the others don't. But I'm glad you're doing it. I'm glad you are courageous and that you are using the science to make a very, very important case. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, fun interview, actually very important. Next up, we're going to talk about, well, this is probably falls in the category of common sense, but we're going to talk about common sense with our next guest. And, where has it gone in our culture and how can we get it back? That's going to be our topic for the next, pretty much the next hour. So, ladies and gentlemen, go to pointofview.net. You can see all about all of our guests, where you can find out more about them, and also the donate button and more about us. So do that. During the break, we'll be back.
So when people first hear about Medi-Share, they have questions. Some good ones, like, what is it? Well, Medi-Share is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry. It's not health insurance. It's a different way of doing things, which leads us to this question. Why do so many become Medi-Share members? 2 big reasons. They save a lot. The typical family saves $500 a month, and they feel great about it. With Medi-Share, you aren't forced to pay for things you don't believe in. Find out more. 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40.
It seems we can't get through a day without hearing how science has been corrupted to support political goals. Media entities have sold out truth for the sake of favored narratives. Even some religious groups have abandoned the Bible to support things based on feelings. So who can you trust? Kirby Anderson and the Point of View Truth Team are your source for real news. Learn how you can make a difference by joining the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. In a world of unending fog, Point of View is a shining light. Do your part at pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
We hope that we make a lot of good common sense on this program, and we are going to talk about common sense. What is it, and why are we losing it? I mean, there are so many things that happen now in the culture that you could just go back and say, well, that just doesn't make common sense. I mean, think about the pronoun issue, where people are now penalized or even fired for not using someone's preferred pronoun, which is different from the pronoun that actually applies to their biology, his, her, whatever. So yeah, that's just one example. We need to restore common sense in the culture, and my next guest is trying to do that by writing books and writing articles and making sense, common sense. His name is Robert Curry. He is the author of Common Sense Nation: Unlocking the Foreign Power of the American Idea, and also another book, Reclaiming Common Sense. He serves on the board of directors of the Claremont Institute, and he also writes a lot of articles. Robert, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on today.
Tell me just what's your definition of common sense?
You know, common sense is easier to recognize than it is to define, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, common sense is like the air we breathe. It's all around us, and we can't live without it. But we tend not to notice it unless something goes wrong.
Unless it's missing from the equation.
Yeah, we notice it when it goes missing, don't we? Well, common sense is a human superpower. It's a gift of the Creator. The capacity for common sense is a gift of the Creator. It allows us to learn from experience, to be educated. It's what enables us to recognize what's right from wrong, to be able to know the truth when it's there. It's really the capacity to be rational beings and moral agents.
How do we get it?
We get it. We first get it as a gift. The capacity we get as a gift. It's one of the things we bring to life, thanks to the Creator, right? And we develop common sense from experience. It's almost the primary job of the parent, almost, to help the child learn common sense. You know, you have to put a roof over their head and feed them and make sure they learn about the creation. But but the child is incapable of the very young child can't handle a knife, can he? And teenagers, can't handle alcohol and car keys. So we have the parent's job is to provide the guardrails, provide the example, and provide the opportunities to learn from experience so that the young person can develop common sense. That's how we do it.
Is it harder today? Because, to me, it would seem like common sense is sort of things that are true. Yes. They prove to be true through your experience. You find out they're true by living life.
Yeah, right.
But now things that are true are being challenged. Truth is being challenged. So in a sense, that's why there's just certain things that hit us like that just doesn't make any common sense, and you can't even argue that anymore.
That's right. Well, what's going on is there's a war on common sense, isn't there?
Yes.
I mean, you mentioned the thing about genders and so on. The thing to understand about that war on common sense is it's the result of a very narrow political agenda. I mean, if a boy says he's a girl, then we're supposed to go along with that, call him she, and so on. But if a boy says he's 21, we don't say, oh, okay, well, fine, well, you can have a driver's license. Or if a boy says he's 65, okay, great, we'll sign you up for Social Security. I mean, in other words, there's in the vast ranges of our life, raising children, deciding what we're going to do in the day, how we're going to get through the day, what we're going to do in our life, the things that are safe to do and not to do, we completely rely on common sense. These very narrow areas where common sense has been under attack are these narrow political areas. I mean, Mr. Trump thinks that we need to build a wall to control our borders, so then suddenly walls are declared immoral, right? But not all walls. I mean, people aren't tearing down the walls around their house and taking the lock off their front door. So these politically correct attacks on common sense have the very bad effect, though, of shaking people's confidence in their common sense, and that's important because the founders' idea was really based on their faith in the common sense of the American people. The idea was that Americans could rule themselves because they have common sense, and if we tell people that there's 121 genders and that a man can be a wife of another man and that walls are immoral, what we're doing is we're doing a couple of things, but one of the things society is happening in society, the political people who are driving these agendas are shaking ordinary people in their confidence in common sense. That's serious.
So it pretty much comes from the left, doesn't it?
Yes. They're doing it on purpose.
And, earlier in the program we were talking about colleges, and my guest, Tom Lindsay from Texas Public Policy Foundation, talked about comfort colleges and where, there's just not the ability now in a college to speak everything that you believe. Sometimes you have to be careful. You're afraid of offending people, and they become places of indoctrination. To get rid of common sense, in one sense, you need indoctrination, don't you?
That's right. Yeah, the founders would never have guessed that we'd be to the point now where people have lost their confidence in common sense. It's taken 200 years of attacks on common sense with various oddball philosophies, rooted in Europe, but now finally imported here through the universities. The ruling doctrine in the universities is postmodernism. And postmodernism is a confusing term, but the thing you need to understand about postmodernism is that according to sort of the core idea of postmodernism is that the idea of truth is obsolete. It's outmoded. And we're going to live in a new post-truth world free of all of that sort of thing. That's why when I have young friends going off to college, I tell them they're going to try to beat the common sense out of you. Don't let them.
Yeah. How do you, what are some strategies for that?
Well, it's a tough situation. One thing is, of course, to pick the right school. I mean, there are a few schools that are not hostile to Christianity, not hostile to common sense, and not hostile to the idea of truth. So they're very tough. I mean, you went to the University of Southern California. I don't know how long ago that was, but places like that now are full-on indoctrination.
Right.
And where I went to school, I was lucky enough to get a real education, but my assistant, her daughter went to the same school, and like me, she was a Regent Scholar. And when she graduated, I took her out to lunch and we talked, and she told me that in the entire time in school, she had never found a single fellow student or a faculty member that she felt safe to speak openly with.
Wow, that's scary.
Isn't that scary? It wasn't like that wasn't like that for you, right?
No, not at all.
It wasn't like that for me. I mean,
college used to be, and we mentioned this earlier in the interview, that it was a place where you could debate differing ideas.
Yeah.
Well, Robert, next up after the break, you also have some comments on the word liberal and the definition of which has changed. We'll do that after the break.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, my guest is Robert Curry. And if you want to weigh in on this conversation, give us a call at 800-351-1212. You can check Robert's picture and website out at pointofview.net and click through. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
A precedent was established when President Trump released the transcript of a conversation between President Zelensky and him on July 25th. Yes, I know that it isn't a word-for-word transcript, but it does give you a good idea of what was said on the conversation, even though many politicians and most of the media misrepresented it. Most press reports have ellipses between the two statements by the president. Those 3 dots represent a deletion of 560 words. But my main point is that we now have a sitting president releasing a transcript of a conversation with a foreign leader. I've seen a number of pundits express concern that this will affect future conversations foreign leaders will have with this president and future presidents. We now have members of Congress wanting to see other transcripts of conversations Trump has had with foreign leaders. The damage has been done, so I'm in favor of releasing past transcripts. We would love to know what President Obama said to Russian President Vladimir Putin. After all, we already have comments that Obama whispered on an open microphone to then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. Obama reminded him, "This is my last election." Then he added, "After my election, I have more flexibility." Let's get the transcripts of the phone conversations between Obama and Putin. I'm sure there are lots of interesting tidbits that the American people need to know, and you can't argue that this would be covered by executive privilege. Obama is out of office. Let's get the transcripts related to the Iran nuclear deal. Let's read what President Obama and Secretary Kerry promised the leaders of Iran. When did they offer to send $1.7 billion in cash on a plane to Iran? The transcripts would answer lots of questions. We're all waiting to see them. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
My guest is Robert Curry, and we are talking about reclaiming common sense. And what is common sense? How do we get it? How do we keep it? We get it as we grow up, as we mentioned, and we have our parents. They teach us, and then we just experience things, and we learn common sense and what works. Do nations learn common sense that way, Robert?
From experience. Yeah, so what an interesting question. I guess so. I'm not sure about nations. You know, nations are just
almost seems like many
market.
Nations are losing it.
Yeah. Well, what's happening, of course, is there's that war on common sense in the West, isn't there? I mean, which started really with Marxism and all those kinds of ideas, which were at war with common sense. The trouble with Marxism, of course, is it failed so drastically. It failed the test of common sense so drastically. So the left, which is basically anchored in Marxism, is not keen to defend common sense and stands ready to attack it at any opportunity.
So what about this word liberal? It used to mean one thing. It means something different now.
Yeah.
So what? How has the meaning changed, and who really changed it?
Thank you. What a great question. This is the longest chapter in my book, Common Sense Nation. It's a complex story. I'm going to try to make it simple. Help me know if I got it across, okay?
Okay.
In the days of the founders, liberal referred to liberty, and the founders were all liberals. And in those days, a liberal education was the knowledge that a person needed to become a truly free person, a person whose mind was able to reason for itself and recognize the truth. Okay, so then along about the 20th century, along came the progressives. Woodrow Wilson was our first full-on progressive president. And the progressives believed that the American founders were just wrong, that people shouldn't rule. We should put the elite in charge. And so Wilson got elected, but he also created in the minds of the Americans recoiled from Wilson. And so when FDR ran, he was a progressive, but he didn't want to have to deal with the burden of people's rejection of progressivism. So he called what he was a liberal. So he basically changed the meaning of the word liberal to its opposite. The progressives were the enemy of the founders' vision, and then when FDR,
so they were really illiberal.
They were very illiberal,
but they called themselves liberal.
But FDR was a master politician. So before he came in, the progressives were known to be anti-American. After he got in, the liberals, he stole their word.
He did.
People who call themselves conservatives today would have, back before FDR, called themselves liberals because they were for limited government and for liberty, right? The progressives are for unlimited government, and they have all the illiberal policies that you discuss all the time are progressive, but they're called liberal because FDR got away with stealing the word. Did I make that clear enough?
I think so. I've heard the words illiberal and liberal used in the context today of people who support allowing many ideas to flourish, and just if you hold to ideas of, for instance, Christian conservative values, yours will rise because they work. And so liberalism, true liberalism, would be allowing those ideas to exist, and illiberalism would be a top-down imposition of a certain idea.
That's exactly right, yeah.
So that's where it is today.
Yeah, so it's a confusing thing, isn't it?
Yes.
Really, the people who get away with calling themselves liberals are actually illiberal.
Yeah.
How'd we do? I think I've got everybody listening confused.
Yeah, well, I do think it does explain some of the things that are going on today.
It makes things so confusing for people to talk about it. If you don't, because if you say liberal education used to be a liberating education. Today, there's no problem. The liberals are the progressives, and what's called liberal education is really just programming in illiberalism. But we have these phrases, illiberal, and they don't make any sense. The illiberal thing doesn't make any sense unless you understand that now political liberal is political illiberalism.
Mm-hmm.
because FDR pulled it off. It's an amazing thing he pulled. So he pulled a rabbit out of a hat.
So what are your prescriptions? What do you recommend in order to bring back true liberalism and also common sense?
Beautiful. I love your question. True liberalism and common sense. Well, that's what the two books are about. The first book is called Common Sense Nation, reclaiming the forgotten power of the American idea. So what the truth is that it's an amazing thing I'm going to tell you. Of course, the left is against the Constitution and the Founders' Vision, but many people who consider themselves to be lovers of the Constitution and defenders of it, defend it using ideas that would have been strange and unrecognizable to the founders. Really, what they're thinking has been forgotten even by the people who defend it. So the first book resurrects the vision, brings it back to life, of the vision of the founders as they understood it. So people need to know that, and that's why I wrote that book. And on the other one is, the important thing about common sense is the whole idea of the founders was that they assumed that we believed in common sense. Tom Paine's great book, Common Sense, argued like two neighbors talking over a fence. And the beautiful, wonderful book, Brief Like Mine, convinced America, not every American, but convinced America that we could rule ourselves, we didn't need a king. That's a big deal. In those days, every country in the world was ruled by a monarch of some kind, a king, an emperor, a sultan, a czar, and when the consensus was, non-scientific consensus was that you had to have a king because people couldn't rule themselves. Well, the founders had this wild and crazy idea that we could rule ourselves based on their understanding of the common sense of Americans. That's what they spoke to. What Tom Paine spoke to in his book Common Sense, and that's what Hamilton and Madison and Jay spoke to when they wrote the Federalist Papers. They were speaking to the common sense of the thoughtful American, and they believed that we could rule ourselves. But if Americans lose confidence in their common sense, then they're going to be led around by the nose. Oh, I don't know which way Sunday, because now we have 121 genders, and I'm told that that there's no such thing as truth. So we need to do two things. We need to re-understand the founders' vision, and we need to reclaim our confidence in the common sense. That's the basis of that system, and that's why I wrote the books.
I noticed one thing you recommend is more reliance on state and local government as opposed to a federal government. And it's the same principle in a sense. The less common sense we have, the less we rely on true common sense, the more police we need, the more powerful leaders we need.
That's the idea.
The more laws we need.
That's the idea. If people aren't living by common sense, then there's got to be rules. If there's got to be rules, there've got to be. The less we live by common sense, the more rules we need. The more rules we need, the more enforcers of rules we need. The more enforcers of rules we need, the more penalties we need. And that's exactly the direction we're going. People say that you and I are breaking 5 or 6 laws today that we don't even know we're breaking. Right?
Right.
There's so many rules out there. They don't even know how many federal rules there are. It's literally a thing of research that they don't know. No one knows the total number of rules that apply to you and me as laws in the federal government. It's just so enormous. But it's a number in the hundreds of thousands, certainly.
All right. Well,
That's
Robert, your books are those small encounter books, right? So they're very, very quick and easy to read and concise.
Yes. The Reclaiming Common Sense is even shorter than Tom Paine's Common Sense, which is sort of delightful to me. Both books are very brief. I want to make it easy for the busy American patriot to take a look and find out what the heck's going on.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can do it by going to pointofview.net. You can find the picture of Robert Curry, and you can click through, and you can get a hold of those books that way. So we recommend you do that. Robert, thank you so much for joining me today.
I enjoyed chatting with you.
I enjoyed it, too. And ladies and gentlemen, let me just, this just kind of dovetails into the necessity of faith. In a sense, people of faith have more common sense, basically, as they walk in their faith, and the need for powerful government, more police, more laws is mitigated because of that. Next up, we've got several stories. We've got several ways in which common sense is violated. We'll talk about them after this.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dyes would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kirby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penna Dexter and Kirby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Phones are open at 800-351-1212. And I thought I'd dedicate this segment not only to your calls, but maybe some stories that really kind of demonstrate the lack of common sense that's kind of permeated our culture. And this one's very sad. And we have discussed this before here on the program. We had one of the players in the studio, and I've interviewed him since that time. And there's a big development that's going to be a matter for prayer for you. But this is a story of James Younger, and I'll just read from this one article. This is one that updated me on the case and on the story. It's out of LifeSite News, but the title of it is "Mommy Says I'm a Girl. Dad Fights to Save 7-Year-Old Son from Gender Transition." And some of you may have been listening when Jeff Younger was in studio with me. He's the father of twin boys. They were 6 at the time. They're 7 now, James and Jude. James, according to the mom, who's not married to Jeff anymore, she's his ex-wife, Ann Georgelis. She says that that Jude's a boy and James is a girl. And she's been insisting upon that for a few years now. And the father, Jeff, is trying to save his son from being put into the whole system that you've read about now of changing or into the gender transition system, which really doesn't transition anybody. Currently, Younger has Texas standard custody of James and Jude. He sees them once a week for 2 hours, and they stay with him 2 weekends a month. Younger is seeking a more equitable custody schedule and decision-making authority for the boy's psychological and psychiatric care. He told us when he was here that the mother takes this little boy to a counselor who is a pro-gender identity, gender transition type counselor, and she, when he's in her home, she treats him as a girl. She's chosen the school he goes to, and he goes to school dressed as a girl. But everywhere else in life, he is a boy. He chooses to be a boy, and he, only acts as a girl when he's around his mother. And it seems like that would be just to please her. So she's got so much more control, though, than the dad that he is on a track to get the hormones given to him at the right age, which is, I think, 8, and he's like 7 now, and to transition him into a girl, and, eventually the surgery and puberty blockers and then surgery and all those things. James presents as a boy. This is what Jeff, the dad, says. James presents as a boy with me and presents as a girl with his mom. He gets dressed as a boy at his mother's home and comes out to me as a boy. That means he's comfortable as a boy in his mother's home. So I guess at home, sometimes he is a boy too. So this is just the saddest thing in the world. It's heartbreaking that the fight and the argument between these parents could result in this little boy having devastating, unchangeable consequences to his not only his mind and psyche, but also his body. Apparently, James and Jude, these twin boys, love to wrestle. They like to play plastic sword fighting. They play nature detective. They play video games together. When a reporter came to interview James, he introduced himself as James. His mother calls him Luna and has the school call him Luna. And he also wears boys' clothing. He has the energy and spirit of a young boy. He plays sumo. And Jeff says, basically, my 2 boys, James is a stick and move boxer and Jude is a wrestler. So, all of these descriptions of him, and I've seen videos. There's a website about James Younger that shows him. They really give lie to the mother's contention that this little boy really wants to be a girl. I don't think so. Jeff says that Jude struggles with understanding how his brother can be a girl. Jude, this is a quote from the dad, Jude is very confused. He struggles with honesty questions because he knows very well he is lying when he goes to his mother's house. In the shower, he has pointed at James' parts and said, how can he be a girl? The father has to, tells him, the court has legally prohibited me from answering that question. And that's true. He can't really talk to James or try to persuade him that he's a girl or any of that, because if that was reported to the authorities, he could be arrested. Apparently, there is some sort of a hearing that's going to be taking place. I guess Jeff will have his final chance in court to save his son in October this month. So that's something to be praying for. And if you heard the whole story from Jeff Younger, and were as moved as I was, you may want to make that a matter of prayer. I know I'm going to do that. The court reduced the order to prevent Younger from taking any action to notify any third party related to the school that the gender of Luna James is different than the child presents. In other words, he's gotten a little bit of his rights back, but not very much. The mother wants them to limit the father's consecutive overnight possession of both children and the father's possession if he fails to affirm Luna. So in other words, she's watching to see if he affirms the girl identity, and she wants to get and is trying to get the cooperation of the courts to do so. And this hearing is going to be part of that. He's trying to get more custody because the more time Jeff, the father, can get with these boys, the better it will be for them with regard to James being able to live as a boy, which he is. Wow, it's pretty scary. The mother, Ann Georgelis, is a pediatrician. She's been granted the sole right to manage the psychiatric and psychological treatment of these two twin boys. And when she got that, it was a big surprise to the dad. He didn't know it. She'd been working on it. She takes James to a homosexual counselor who has diagnosed him with gender dysphoria. But the father says he has nothing of that. He does not display the classic symptoms of gender dysphoria. And he's been observed over the last few months. There have been sort of inquiries into his life. He's had different investigators looking at him. So I think that determination whether he's truly gender dysphoric will be made and perhaps will affect what the courts do. This, ladies and gentlemen, this is here in Dallas, Texas. So I'm speaking about something that's, we're not in a liberal blue area of the country. This is happening. This type of thing is happening to other families. But this story is, because we've covered it here at Point of View, it becomes very real to us. And it's hard to believe, and I guess that's why I brought this up under the rubric of common sense. It's hard to believe that something like this is really happening, but because the actual definitions of male, female, sex, gender identity, and all of that, because all of that is being challenged today, these things are happening, and they affect real people, and they damage these kids. James said, or Jeff said, the dad, when I took James to see his gay counselor, who affirms him as a girl, he went as a boy. She put 2 sticky notes down on the desk. One had James on it. The other had the fake girl named Luna. She said, which name do you want to be called? Pick up the sticky note. He picked up James. So there you go. Anyway, I don't want to really pursue this any longer other than to ask you to pray for James Younger. And if you want to find out more, you can go to Google it, because I'm not sure exactly what the name of the website is, but it's under the word, I think it's savejames.com, something like that. The father, Jeff, is arguing that his 7-year-old son should not be allowed to make life-offering and permanent decisions. We have 2 choices for James. One is we can go with his mother, in which case he will go down the transgender route, and he will live a life of banishment and despair, because we know that people who are transgender end up having significant psychological problems. And as Anne herself said, no mother or parents wants her child to be transgender. She even said that, but she's insisting that he is. Or, says Jeff, he could come with me and have a very good chance at a normal life. And really, it's probably not too late right now. But the longer this goes on, the worse it's going to be and the harder it's going to be to, especially if he starts getting puberty blocking drugs. The question the dad asks, why would we privilege the abnormal gender expression that leads to a bad outcome when we could privilege the normal gender expression? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the dad in this equation is making common sense. The mother is not. She has an agenda. I don't understand why any mother would have that agenda, but she does. So pray for James Younger. We've got a lot more. We've got to fit it in this final segment. We'll be back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Phones are open, 800-351-1212. If you want to weigh in on the James Younger story, you are welcome to do so, 800-351-1212. Here's another non-commonsensical story. This comes from the Daily Signal, put out by the Heritage Foundation. New York City will fine you for saying illegal alien. That's an assault on the Constitution. It's by, I never can pronounce his name, Hans von Spakovsky, I believe. He makes a lot of common sense in his writings. And he talks about, in New York City, the Commission on Human Rights recently released new legal enforcement guidelines that ban the use of the term illegal alien Employers can't say it. Housing providers, including hotels, can't use the words. And law enforcement can't say it. If you violate this, you can be punished with exorbitant and punitive fines up to $250,000 per offense. So, in other words, he says, the city will now censor and penalize anyone for using the correct legal term that has been used in both federal immigration law and numerous court decisions, including by the Supreme Court. He says this is a violation of the First Amendment, and they want people to use the word undocumented immigrant. They want it replaced with that, which basically doesn't describe the situation, because they really are illegal. They're in the country illegally, and I think that's why they don't want us, since New York is a sanctuary city, they don't want that fact to be highlighted by using the term illegal immigrant. Undocumented immigrant, says Hans, is a made-up term that ignores the law. So, I think that's what, going back to common sense sometimes defies also sort of dovetails along with the law and what the law is and what the law should be, what's right and what's wrong. But sometimes when you deviate from that, you begin to, I guess, weaken or mitigate the power of the law. Illegal alien is the correct legal term. So it really doesn't make sense to say you're being offensive when you use that word. But a lot of people say that's offensive. That's offensive to the illegals. Well, yes, perhaps it does offend them because they are doing something illegal. That is how people are going to now be punished, by being fined, big fines for using the term illegal alien. And this action by New York, says Hans, is so far outside the bounds of what it can legally do and such a fundamental violation of the First Amendment and common sense. It's hard to imagine, says Hans, that it's anything other than a fictional plot in a book like 1984, but it's not fiction. In fact, this Human Rights Commission supposedly limits the reach of this ban by saying it's only a violation of the term when illegal alien is used with intent to demean. But how do you really decide that? So that's one more thing that's happening in the area of who's here in the country and who isn't. Let's go to the phones now. Ruth is in South Carolina listening in on GNN. Hi, Ruth. Thank you for calling in.
Hi there, Penna. I have an example of lack of common sense in public education. We had a student that was transitioning. He was becoming a she, and so I had to escort him to the bathroom so that he would not be, his personal space would not be invaded while he was in this obviously public restroom. And I was told by...
So you would go in there with him?
No, I would stand guard at the door.
Okay.
And then I was told by the principal, we don't want to talk about this. We just want to keep this quiet.
How long ago was this?
And this was last year.
Okay.
And this made me extremely uncomfortable. And I voiced my opinion several times, not, from a spiritual standpoint or a Christian standpoint, but simply that I was not comfortable doing this and in this way, that it was just very clandestine, it was very secretive, and I just didn't understand why we were doing it. I said, I just don't understand why we are doing this for one student in a school of 900.
Have you ever gotten an answer?
Never did.
I was wondering, because the reason I asked when it was because President Obama had this whole gender identity directive.
Yeah.
Where they changed the definition of sex, and so to what you think you are. But if it was just last year, then we weren't under that.
Well, I was just, when you said that, it could have been the year before, like the end of the year, because someone else ended up pulling that duty last year.
They did.
So I was given the duty. Yeah.
So every day you had to do this?
Whenever he had to go to the bathroom.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that part of it, where somebody might. Was he young?
Oh, yeah. He was 12.
Okay.
Actually, he was 11 when he began the process.
Oh.
And he's up at the high school now, and still, he looks very female.
Mm-hmm.
And
wonder if he
I'm
still
just-
has to get
it-
escorted to the restroom.
I don't know if he's been escorted still or not, but I've been in education 40 years, and I told my husband I never thought in my 40 years that I would ever have to do anything like that, and I never thought that I would even see that, much less participate in it.
Do you see? Because
it is.
Well, I was going to ask
Go ahead.
you because I've
Mhm.
seen that it can be sort of a social thing now, especially with
Yeah.
some girls. Do you see a lot of that where girls in groups of friends, deciding that they are boys?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
do.
It is more of a fad, I believe, than a true. I don't even want to downplay the identity problem, or the identity confusion. But it just seems to be more of a fad. And I've done, education long enough that I've seen fads.
Mm-hmm.
And this seems more of like a fad. It is something that is kind of catchy, come and be with us and be gay and be lesbian, and, we'll have this kind of fun and we'll be together. And it's almost like they are looking for identity, but they're looking for identity more in a group, if that makes sense.
Amazing. Do you have do you have any requirements with regard to pronouns you have to use?
We have been instructed. We've been through sensitivity training so that we sometimes don't even know who we're talking to. I'll have to ask the teacher. I don't want to give too much identity away of what I do in the school because, I'm not really supposed to be talking about this. But sometimes I'll have to say now, do I need to know anybody in this group that I should refer to any other way besides she or he? And they will tell me, so-and-so over there with the blue shirt on is actually a she.
Okay. Wow.
But looks like a he. So I'm just like, okay. And then sometimes I get so confused, I don't even know who I'm talking to.
Yeah. Has anybody ever called you on that? What if you did it wrong?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Ruth,
Yeah.
thank you.
I've had the kids-
You
I've
make
had-
it real to us. We hear these stories, but it's really
It's real. I promise you. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
I've actually had the kids. Yeah, I've had the kids correct me, and then I just made a joke about it. I wasn't trying to be funny. I just kind of brushed it off, and I got a phone call from the parent, and the parent already called the principal about me, and so.
Okay.
Yeah, you can in public education, you can lose your job over
Yes.
a simple pronoun.
Well, that is true. Thank you so much for your call, Ruth. And that was going to be my last non-common sense story because one teacher actually did, but we'll have to talk about that another day. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Steve. And thanks, Karen. We will see you tomorrow.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So, what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.